Welcome to Let's Talk Democracy, the show where we have meaningful conversations on democracy. I'm your host, Tina Johnson. And each week, we're joined by people who are doing the hard work of building healthy democratic environments. With insightful guests, expert advice, and thought-provoking conversations, we dive deep into the heart of democracy. Whether you're here to learn or to get inspired, we've got something for you. Let's jump in and explore today's episode. Like so many of you, after the Vice President Kamala Harris's loss in the 2024 presidential election to Donald Trump, I was struck by a profound sense of uncertainty. The impact of that shift in leadership was immediate, not just for the United States, but for communities around the world. And I could feel the shockwaves reverberate through the lives of my friends, my family, and my community. The first weeks following Trump 2.0 were nothing short of devastating. It became clear that American democracy as we knew it was under threat. And the media, with its ceaseless narratives of what was now the political new normal, only heightened the feelings of anger, frustration, and sadness that I was hearing from those closest to me. But I believe in solutions, especially in moments of chaos. I wanted to find a way through this mess. So I turned to something I know best, the power of community. A model I believe in deeply, the cooperative model, is one where democracy is not a concept, but something lived and practiced every day. It's a model of self-reliance, mutual support, and solidarity. A way to show up for one another, even when the systems around us seem to be failing. That's what we're going to talk about here today. How we can build that solidarity, find solutions in the face of political and social upheaval, and make a tangible difference in our communities. This first conversation in the podcast is about more than just surviving the political moment we find ourselves in. It's about thriving together and creating change from the ground up. Today, we welcome Joe Holtz, the general manager of the Park Slope Food Co-op in Brooklyn, New York. He's been a key figure in managing one of the largest and most well-known food cooperatives in the U.S. since 1973. The co-op is often celebrated for its worker-member cooperative model. At its core, this model is built on principles of democratic governance, collective decision-making, and shared responsibility among members. However, the conflict in Gaza has led to intense debates among the co-op's members. The co-op's democratic structure has been tested by these highly charged discussions and questions on how can a democratic organization maintain its unity and values when external forces like the war in Gaza create such sharp divisions among its members. Today, Joe Holtz is here with me to talk about co-ops and democracy. Welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Thank you, Tina. I'm happy to be here.
Joe, do you remember the first time we met?
Let me see. I think you came to visit the Park Slope Food Co-op. I think we met on the telephone, and you told me that you wanted to start a food co-op in Chester, Pennsylvania. And I told you described Chester, Pennsylvania. You described how many supermarkets there were, of which there were 0. And I told you, no, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, that's exactly what you told me. And I did it anyway. But
Right.
I was super inspired by the work that you had done with the Park Slope Food Cooperative, in large part because of the way in which it was built from the community up. And you moved into Park Slope when there was nothing in Park Slope.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting neighborhood near 4 different subway stops and Prospect Park and the main branch of the Brooklyn Public Library and the Botanical Gardens and the Brooklyn Museum. And for some reason, people were fleeing from the neighborhood. So young people like myself could find a place to rent at a very, very reasonable price because the traditional residents, well, some of them were able to leave and were leaving. I think the perception was that it was high crime.
But that was in 73.
Right. That was I moved. I lived near the neighborhood for about a year, but then I moved back like late August of '72, and I started working with a group of people who became the founders of the Park Slope Food Co-op. We opened in February '73, so we worked for about 6 months before the founding.
In 1973, what was happening that made the co-op so appealing to you?
I was born in 1950, and my generation, or at least some of my generation, grew up being in love with the great things about the American story, about freedom and democracy and being welcoming and kind of living the words uh, from the Declaration of Independence, that kind of thing. And so we were quite disappointed when the United States' role in the Vietnam War, in particular, became clear to us that it was wrong. And we were also very amazed at the need for the civil rights movement and racism, and that being a major problem. And we were started looking into the history of United States invasions of Latin America over the previous 100 or 150 years or whatever. We were growing up to be a kind of anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist. And then the women's movement started, and young men like me learned about things that were ingrained in our culture and that were ingrained in us, and tried to actively engage in improving and not buying into male domination, and trying to live that. Then we learned about the gay rights movement, and turns out some of our friends were gay. And then we learned about the environmental movement. Earth Day started in 1970. So the food co-ops were a reaction to all that, because if you didn't trust the justice system around race, and you didn't trust the foreign policy of your country around, say, imperialist ventures and wrong-headed, wrong-headed domino theories like that. So that if you didn't trust that, you also didn't trust necessarily the food supply. And it turns out, you know, we learned about the food supply and how pesticides accumulate as you go up the food chain. We learned that from the book Diet for a Small Planet. And some of us got into food. Some of the people in the broader counterculture got into food. Some didn't. Some people weren't anti-imperialist generally. They were just anti-Vietnam War. Some people didn't extend it to the idea that maybe capitalism wasn't necessarily the best thing. And so people started realizing that without giving capitalism its due, which I now give it its due, that our capitalist society allowed for cooperatives, even though people like myself didn't ever see ourselves working in a business, because business was kind of a dirty word. Over time, we learned that cooperatives actually were businesses and they were allowed, and that we wanted to take matters into our own hands. And so we wanted to do something self-help, because we really wanted to eat better. It turns out eating better costs more money. And we were young people who were not making a lot of money. So we decided to copy what we'd seen across the country of people starting co-ops in the Midwest, on the West Coast, in New York City. We proceeded from there, and proceeded to welcome everybody in the world to be a member of our co-op, not even writing people's names down at first, not incorporating, not buying insurance, not having any money in the bank when we wrote checks for food, which apparently I might not have been illegal then, but it's illegal now. So we made sure we didn't bounce any checks. So we were grassroots, seat of the pants. We could do it. We're going to do this, people. And we didn't think of asking foundations for help. We thought the foundations wouldn't like us, the Ford Foundation, at all. That's what our opinion was. We were to the left of all that. So why would we ask?
In the 70s, when the co-op started, there were like 10,000 co-ops, I think, across the country. And I think today there are less than 100 food cooperatives in the United States.
There were several hundred, but there were far more then. The National Cooperative Grocers, which is a co-op that we're members of, we're one of 160 co-ops. And there are plenty of co-ops that are not members of National Cooperative Grocers.
Having started the Chester Food Cooperative in Pennsylvania, I understood the power of community and building together. And I think more than food, I was hoping that the co-op could be a community that could see its way through the political challenges they had, the economic challenges they had within the city, to be able to come together and work to solve one of its pressing problems, which was access to food. I remember our first general membership meeting, we had a vote. I remember a member during the meeting said, "Do you mean to tell me my vote matters?" I think about democracy and how disconnected it can be for people. And what I saw in the co-ops is how it is a micro democratic environment. I would like to talk about that because I think that's important.
Well, I think having a community controlled organization that people really own together and work together, I think it's very gratifying for the member owners. And it can be. It's not equal for everybody, but it by and large is very gratifying. And I'm going to use the word empowering. It's empowering. It gives people a, a view of what can be done in our world. So the democracy is an interesting form of democracy that we developed here. And remember, we came from the founders, and the earliest members were pretty distrustful of leaders and people who had power. So we didn't. Our initial instinct wasn't let's elect 7 people to run this place or to make policy. That was not our instinct. And we still have tried to avoid that, actually, to this day. We had no guidelines from the law. We just had essentially instinctively, we had open meetings, and we said everybody who could come to the meeting gets to vote and gets to help decide policy. We'll discuss it face to face, and we'll make our decisions, and we'll go forward. Should the co-op, after signing a lease to buy the building that we were in, and with an option to buy, should we actually buy the building? That kind of decision was made at basically a community meeting that was held once a month that we called the general meeting. We incorporated in 1977, but we went about 4 years being in, as they say, unincorporated association. The closest form of democracy that people might be familiar with is the New England town meeting form of democracy, that everybody who shows up at the town hall gets to be heard and gets to raise their hand and vote. And we had them and still have them on Tuesday nights. You could have some obligation on Tuesday nights that it's unavoidable obligation, and you can never come. And so some people are really annoyed by that and feel it's exclusionary against those folks who can never come for whatever reason. But other people say, no, these things need to be discussed. And we need to let the wisdom come out of the crowds, as they say, wisdom of crowds. Our co-op is a really good example of the wisdom of crowds. A lot of very wise decisions have been made by that ever-changing group of people that come to our general meetings. And a lot of not so good decisions have been avoided and voted down. So it's kind of like direct democracy. It's not representative democracy. So then we incorporated and the New York State Cooperative Corporation Law. And by the way, isn't it great that there's a New York State Cooperative Corporation Law, and there's plenty of states that have cooperative corporation laws to make a pathway for cooperatives to function in the capitalist society. And really, the cooperative corporation laws are all, pardon the expression, business corporation laws. They're all business. I now embrace the word business. But when I was younger in the 70s, I didn't like to think of business, although it turns out we were good at it. So we're business. And we then, because of the cooperative corporation law, is written in a way that says, oh, by the way, all the power is in the board of directors. And you have to have a board of directors that's all powerful. And so one of our members, who happened to be an attorney, and he wrote the bylaws to say, okay, we're going to have a board of directors, and the board is all powerful. They have to have things in here that say that. But in the paragraph about meetings, he said, okay, the board is going to invite the members to come to all the meetings, which implies that there won't be any executive sessions and that the meetings will be open. And they have been. The first closed meeting of the board happened during the COVID emergency. So we went from 1977 to the COVID emergency with the members being invited to every single board meeting. The way it was written is that the board of directors shall receive the advice of the members on all matters that come before it. And then eventually we amended it to be more explicit, and that the members and that portion of the board meeting shall be called the general meeting. And then at the general meeting, members can choose to vote to express their advice to the board. And so members will vote. A member comes up with the idea that, okay, we should have childcare at the co-op. I noticed this room upstairs now that the co-op has moved from its second floor location. So then that came up from the membership. It didn't come down from the one or two staff who couldn't possibly think of everything. So that was democracy in action. A member proposed that. It's not like the leaders are going to think of everything that's needed. And a member felt empowered and understood the pathway that they were invited to every meeting. Had that person been a single parent, they probably might have had a really good idea. They probably could have done is write a letter to the editor, which we would have published because we have an open press. It's an important part of democracy. We have an open press that's run not by the paid leadership of the co-op or by those people who got elected to the board. No, it's run by members getting work credit. So there's a lot of democratic pathways in the co-op.
The co-op model is a representative model for democracy and allowing people to find their voice. The example I shared with the member of the co-op that was started in Chester, feeling that she had a voice in saying what she wanted and what would actually be available to her and to the members was empowering. What I wanted to dive into with you is that arc, right? Like we have the 70s, you have the Vietnam War, you have a great upheaval within the United States with young people dropping out of university. You dropped out of university. Many people deciding to engage in making the world around a better place by engaging in it in a very different way. Do you see that arc and where we are today? And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on the democratic process.
It's might be a stretch, to compare the democracy in the co-op to the democracy in our country. But I have sometimes, I'm self-aware that I'm a leader here and that like anybody in quote power, there's a bunch of people just distrust everybody that's in power. But the thing is that when you're in leadership in a co-op or in leadership in an organization, and that the organization is supposed to have democratic norms and democratic customs and democratic instincts, the people functioning in the democracy, it's really almost impossible to write everything down of what's expected of you, in every role in the co-op that feeds toward strengthening the democracy and not diminishing it, and not having people grab power that really should be shared, grab power for themselves. So I learned early on that, okay, if the leadership of the co-op, the people who are running the co-op nuts and bolts day after day, now remember, we still require all our members to participate in the work. The leadership would have had to been trusted to understand the culture of the co-op and the norms of the co-op and make decisions about chicken and eggs from what they understood. And eventually, if they make enough mistakes or important mistakes, members, if there's a pathway to members speaking up, members will say, well, we wish you wouldn't have done that. And we hope you don't do that again, because that's one you should have shared with us. You shouldn't just go ahead and do that. It's very important for people who are in a position to make decisions to understand when they need to bring things to a group. And so when is it that the President of the United States should ask Congress instead of just doing something? What are the limits of executive power? Transparency is important, but everybody has a democratic responsibility to follow democratic norms. I remember when the president of Egypt was elected by less than 50%, but the person got the most votes. What was it called?
Arab Spring.
So in Egypt, they got rid of the then dictator, I believe, and they had elections, and someone won the election, and with less than half the vote, but those are the rules. They came to power and they didn't understand how to function in a democracy. And that led to alienating enough of society that the military rose up and took back the country again. So it's like that person who took over did not have democratic ideas, was not schooled in democracy, possibly didn't care about democracy. I have no idea, but they screwed it up, and they built an incredibly 4-lane speed highway towards ruining the democracy that they had. That's what that person did. They created the demise of the democracy that they had gotten elected to lead, because they weren't going to be leading for all the people. They're going to be leading in a partisan, prejudicial, non-democratic way. And so my point about democracies and how they're vulnerable is that you need people in leadership positions who have respect for the democracy. And how can you ensure that? Clearly, the American people, I don't think, are all that good at it, judging from the last election, for example. Because we put someone in charge of our democracy who isn't particularly pro-democratic, and that's a problem. What I see is a risk for our democracy in America. And I look at co-ops, and if you look at the 7 international principles of cooperation, the second one says co-ops should be democracies. And so I found that reading the cooperative principles, the statement of cooperative identity that was revised in 1995 by the International Cooperative Alliance, that principle number 2 is very important. So is principle number 1 important. Number 1 says the litmus test, essentially it says the litmus test for being a good member of a cooperative is to cooperate and do your share of cooperation, and whatever that means for each cooperative, and that everybody's welcome, regardless of your religion, regardless of your race, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your nationality. Everybody's welcome. That's good. And it turns out it could be difficult, because some people want their co-op to be a winner-take-all situation and not welcome everybody. We came up with the word, or maybe we didn't come up with it, but it certainly became part of the language in the mid-1980s in our co-op, when someone used the phrase food fascist. What's a food fascist? A food fascist who says the co-op should only carry the things that aren't in their diet, rather than say, okay, we're going to lead with choices of food, and we're going to build our co-op around a certain narrow choice of food decision. Or we're going to build our co-op around that everybody who wants to cooperate is precious, and we should try and serve all those precious member owners as best we can.
The conversation on democratic norms and where we are at this point in time in the history of the world, where those norms have been pushed to the side or ignored, has created such anxiety and a feeling of fear. You keep hearing the word fascism being put out there, that we're heading towards a fascist state, or that we are there. Yes, and if that is the case, where's our off-ramp? Where is the opportunity that we have to reset and to reestablish those democratic norms? We have 2 years in which we can effectively change the legislative body, the House and the Senate. There will be members of both of those houses that will be up for election. That's one way. The voting opportunity that we have in 2 years as an off-ramp. I was wondering if you had thoughts on how do we reclaim or reestablish that path towards normalizing democracy again.
Well, my thoughts about that are that the shining sunlight on what's going on and resorting to ultra transparency about what's going on through shining that sunlight and trying to get the word out to people. Now, it's particularly hard because some people have decided that when they turn on their TV, they only watch one channel.
Mm.
And everything else is they've decided is fake news, and that one channel is probably telling them that everything else is fake news. And so it's almost like a cult. How do you get people out of that cult? And so that's very difficult. But I think we're here on Earth, and we have to keep trying. And so I would encourage everybody to keep trying and to keep trying to get enough people to realize that what's happening, that democracy is far better than these alternative things that are being put forward, that more democracy is better than less democracy or no democracy for certain. And how do you describe that? How do you prove that? You would hope that Americans have some deep well of historical knowledge, of some understanding of what democracy is and when it's being breached. You would hope. I would hope. Um, we need to believe in that saying. I don't remember the exact quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that said, the arc of history bends towards something really good, bends towards freedom, bends towards justice. I don't remember the quote, but it was one of those things. I hope that the arc of history bends towards freedom, justice, and democracy, that we made a lot of steps forward. That when I mentioned all those movements earlier, particularly the civil rights movement and the environmental movement and the gay rights movement and the women's movement, there's been some real progress about that. And so maybe you could say, well, that was 100 steps forward. And now maybe even while we were doing that, we were taking a whole bunch of steps backward, because the fact that we elected Barack Obama, it seems like Donald Trump is a direct reaction, a backward reaction to electing a lovely, competent, thoughtful, compassionate Black man as leader of our country. And then the reaction to that was, among certain people, the worst people came out of the woodwork. And now some of them are sitting in the administration. It is 5 steps forward, 4.5 steps back, or maybe we're 5 steps forward, 6 steps back. But over the arc, the longer arc, is it 200 steps forward and maybe it's 188 steps back? It's still an improvement. So while we're here living our lives, I think we all have an obligation to keep working towards improvement, to not give up hope, and keep our eye on improvement. And that's what I hope we do. And I hope that, like you said, in 2 years there's an election. The House of Representatives will hopefully become a problem for the current administration, and perhaps the Senate will too. I don't know that. How do we make it so that we hold leaders accountable? I once read this book about co-ops written by someone who was involved from the 1930s until the 1980s, and he wrote this book, a little book in around 1980, I think it was. And you know what he called co-ops? He called them, it was interesting, he called them societies. Wow.
One of the things I think is very important in the discussion of democracy, because they are societies and they function in a way where folks have transparency, feel connected, feel heard, feel seen. They don't have to agree, but that there's a way forward in a democratic way, that maybe not everyone's going to be happy, but folks are going to understand where each person is coming from in their displeasure or their pleasure. It doesn't mean that winning the majority of the votes gives you permission to ignore the democratic process and
Exactly.
responsibilities of the office, which is to govern and to represent everyone, regardless of whether or not they voted for you or not. I wanted to tell you, the quote is Martin Luther King Jr., as you said. The quote is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but bends towards justice." And I think that that quote is very important because, as you pointed out earlier, it is this conversation around the norm. I'm going to call it the morals of democracy and what it means and should mean to be people of a free country. You do have the power to vote, and that power to vote is for you to be able to use that as your voice to further opportunities and a collective sense of growth towards a life that is representative for everyone. How do we keep shining a light and bringing the transparency?
The question for me is, what do we do now that we made a mistake and elected someone who's good to try and diminish democracy and not enhance it? Someone who doesn't understand the norms, or might understand them, but deliberately is against them and wants to refuse to go by them. So during these dark ages of that, how do we swing the pendulum back so that the arc of the moral universe keeps progressing? We still have a robust freedom of press in this country. We don't see journalists getting murdered like they are in some countries. We don't see them getting arrested like they are in some countries. We have to take what we still have and use that as a sunlight generator. We need to, again, try to elect people into positions that have respect for the democratic systems. That's what I think is important.
The first line of the Constitution is "We the people."
Mhm.
And I think about that because it's an aspirational document that aspired and aspires us to be inspired to reach beyond the limitations of our own understanding of what I can do, but we the people, what we want, what we dream of having, what we envision, in which we collectively can find a path and can create within our communities, within our society, ways in which we can all benefit and can move forward in a way that we build together a society, a community, a country that does have enough room, is enough space for all of us to be able to exist as we are. And I think that perhaps one of the things that we could start doing within that transparency is moving away from the I narrative and back towards the we narrative of we, the people. Are there any challenges that the co-op is facing?
We have a challenge going on right now, a challenging situation in our co-op democracy right now as we speak. And that is centered around the what's happened in Israel, Palestine, Gaza ever since October 7th, 2023, when Hamas invaded Israel and took hostages and, killed people. And then Israel reacted by killing 50,000 people and counting. Even though there's a ceasefire now, it's just a temporary ceasefire, and we don't know what's going to happen next. It's a very horrible, sad, terrible situation. I would say if you asked our members, I would hope, I would guess, if you asked our members, do they agree with the following statement? We should demand a ceasefire now and release of the hostages. And that should be the co-op's position. I think we get wide agreement on that, maybe 80, 90% agreement that that's what should happen, like right now. And I don't mean just a temporary ceasefire. I mean a ceasefire, all the hostages, ceasefire, etc. But the co-op is not a political organization. The co-op is a cooperative organization that's trying to accomplish cooperation around a certain goal, which is getting good food at low prices for its members, good quality food, telling the truth about the food, welcoming everybody into the co-op, regardless of their political beliefs, regardless of who they are in the world. We have thousands of members on each side of this issue. We have very few items from Israel. There's a group that wants us to join the targeted boycott of certain products from Israel, sponsored by Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, BDS. There are thousands of members on that side. We have over 16,000 members. They've collected over 3,000 signatures, according to them. What they want is the co-op to join that boycott. And they feel like, well, we're member owners of the co-op is speaking in our name by buying these products. And if we're buying from these targeted products from Israel, then we're part of the genocide. So we don't want to be part of genocide. We're going to propose this, and we're trying to propose this in the co-op. Then you have thousands of members on the other side who say, well, we think targeting Israel as a country to boycott is unacceptable. It's unacceptable because we believe embedded in that is the belief that Israel as a nation should cease to exist. Not even the issue of whether or not it should have existed from the beginning or not, but now it's not 1948 anymore. Now it's 2025, and it has existed all those years. And now that it has existed all those years, we don't believe it should cease to exist. And part of the movement that supports this says that it shouldn't exist. The people on the first side that I described also say that Zionism equals genocide. And the other side says, no, they say Zionism, if you think Israel has a right to exist, therefore, you believe in genocide. And there are people who are progressive. I would bet there's barely a Trump voter among them who are on the other side, who say, no, it's not acceptable. We will feel unwelcome at the co-op, and we might have to quit, and future members might not join, if, and so then this is our democracy under pressure. How do democracies deal with pressure when there's thousands of people on each side, possibly equal numbers on each side? We don't know yet. At some point, there might be a vote, and so how does each side is trying to use the democratic norms that are available in the co-op to talk about this issue, to push it forward. How does the losing side work? How does the losing side feel? How do they continue to feel like this is their co-op? How do they continue to feel welcome? Here we are in a famously progressive neighborhood, and yet we also are in the center of the second biggest population in the world of Jewish people. The biggest population outside of Israel of Jews is the New York metropolitan area. And you could easily make a case that Brooklyn is the center of that. There are vast Jewish communities in Brooklyn, several different ones, and also Jews living outside of those communities in Brooklyn, all over Brooklyn. This is a challenge for our democracy. Likewise, it's a challenge for our American democracy right now. People wonder, why is the Pax Foucault talking about foreign policy or talking about a distant war? And it has nothing to do with, it has everything to do with the fact that we have no link to Sudan. I've never seen a product from Sudan. I haven't studied up on the horror that's going on in Sudan. I know there's a horror going on. But what's going on in Ukraine is horrible. Has anybody proposed a boycott of Russia? Talk about France. We have plenty of cheese.
It's not the broader U.S. issue, but it is similar in the sense that people feel justified in their position, in the way that they think, in the way that they feel, their ideology. Though I know you say you don't know what to do, it sounds like what you're doing is keeping a door open for debate.
Yes.
So that you have the opportunity to come and to share and to disagree and to be where you need to be as far as how you're going to express yourself. The co-op isn't going to solve this, right? Because this is not a co-op issue, but it's affecting the co-op's community, society, and then finding ways to support and undergird the opportunity for there to be robust dialogue, even if it's uncomfortable.
Right. People care about their co-op and they love their co-op. They love this co-op. I sit at my desk Mostly I'm at my desk. I do move around the co-op, but mostly I'm at my desk, and we have a paging system that any member could pick up one of 10 different phones all over the place and say, "Do we have any more of those such and such brand of breadcrumbs in the basement? The shelf is empty." And so when I hear someone say, "Do we have any more?" I chalk one up. I put a gold star in my mind for cooperation, because someone said, "Do we have any?" They didn't say, "Do you have any?" Now, sometimes they say "you," but the "we's" outnumber the "you's" vastly. I don't have an answer, for this dilemma that we're going through, but we are certainly going through this dilemma, and we're going to be renting a space, probably for the end of April general meeting, to vote on one of the issues that'll lead up eventually, perhaps, to an actual vote on joining the targeted boycott of Israel as defined by BDS. One thing that this is all being done, and people like me who point this out are being called fear mongers, and I'll tell you what it is. We're aware, as a citizen, I'm aware of Project 2025, the reactionary right-wing doctrine, the Trump supporters, many of whom are now being appointed to key positions in the administration. And there's a subchapter to that called Project Esther. And Project Esther talks about targeting organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a progressive Jewish organization that completely supports BDS, as far as I know. Project Esther says that they're going to go after organizations that are what they deem to be anti-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. As a veteran of many demonstrations in my life, and I understand the vast power of the state. I understand the state-sponsored murder of Black Panthers that happened. I was alive and thinking at that time as a young adult. So I know about that. I don't think the state flexing its vast power is out of the realm of possibility. And I think the Fox could be crushed by the state. What I mean is by the federal government. And so I'm saying to members, you should take that into account in your thinking. And people are saying, "Oh, you leaders, you, Joe Holtz, and the other general coordinators, you're just fear mongering. You're trying to put your thumb on the scale of this debate." And we feel like, no, we're stewards of the co-op, and we have to point out the risks. And we think that's a risk. And now, in the first 2 weeks of the Trump administration, I think is starting to, maybe some people are realizing that we might very well be right. Now, I can't prove that we're going to be right, and they can't prove that I'm fear-mongering. But it's like, what's the role of democracy? Well, part of it is people should speak their mind. And so I'm scared of the co-op boycotting Israel. I'm scared of consequences. I'm scared of people attacking the co-op in whatever form that is. This is a precious organization. It'd be a shame for it to be the collateral damage of this conflict that has been brought home across the ocean to our streets in Brooklyn. So this is a difficult thing. This is a very difficult thing. I don't know the answer. I want the co-op to continue to, I don't want the co-op's democracy to be blown up in one direction or the other. I don't want the board, who have respected the advice of the members, I don't want the board to stop respecting the advice of the members. I think that's a great tradition. It's not required. The board is supposed to use their business judgment as to whether or not to approve the advice that they get. It's a kind of a beautiful system we've made here, that we've developed, but you could find the vulnerabilities. So the question, is there a system without vulnerability? Clearly, the United States system of democracy has vulnerabilities. And so it's our job to somehow preserve democracy in the co-op and in the United States, and to work for that, and for everybody to love one another. You know that great song? Let's all love one another. How about that?
Thank you for today with our guest, Joe Holtz. The podcast explores the fascinating connection between co-ops and democracy,
Tina,
and how these organizations not only embody democratic principles in their operations, but also offer a powerful model for rethinking democracy in society. Join me next week when I am in conversation with Vemba Dizolele, a senior fellow and director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic International Studies in Washington, D.C., where we discuss the pendulum swing of democracy. Talk to you then.